The massive creature writhed in agony on the crystalline surface of Kepler-442b, its 6 powerful legs scraping helplessly against the ground. Purple blood seeped from dozens of wounds across its armored hide, creating dark pools that reflected the twin suns overhead. The beast, known to the galactic community as a Vorthak, stood nearly 12 feet tall and stretched over 20 feet in length. Its once magnificent golden scales had dulled to a sickly bronze, and its usually fierce amber eyes now clouded with pain and exhaustion. Captain Elena Rodriguez of the human research vessel Endeavour watched through her binoculars as the last of the Zilithian evacuation ships disappeared into the orange sky. The insectoid aliens had worked for 3 standard days to remove their equipment and personnel from the mining colony below. But they had left one thing behind: the injured. Vorthak that had served as their primary excavation assistant for over 2 decades? Ma'am. The Zilithian commander is requesting final departure clearance, reported Lieutenant Chun from the communications station. His voice carried a note of disgust that Elena shared. In their brief exchange with the Zilithian expedition leader, it had become clear that they considered the wounded creature nothing more than broken machinery. Elena lowered her binoculars and turned to face her diverse crew of 37 humans aboard the bridge. The Endeavour was a relatively small vessel, designed for deep space research and first contact missions rather than mining operations. They had arrived at Kepler 442b to study the planet's unique electromagnetic properties, not to witness what amounted to corporate abandonment of a sentient being. Dr. Martinez, what's your assessment of the creature's condition? Elena asked her chief xenobiologist, an elderly woman whose expertise in alien physiology was legendary throughout the Sol Federation. Dr. Carmen Martinez consulted her tablet, her weathered face grim with concern. From what I can observe at this distance, the Vorthak appears to have multiple deep lacerations, possibly from a mining accident. There's significant blood loss, and I'm detecting elevated stress hormones in the atmospheric samples we've collected. Without immediate medical intervention, I estimate it has perhaps 48 hours before organ failure sets in. The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Elena knew that her crew was thinking the same thing she was. No other species in the galactic community would even consider helping a wounded Vorthak. The creatures were known throughout civilized space as powerful but dangerous beings. Originally from the harsh desert world of Vorth Prime, their natural strength and ability to consume almost any organic matter made them valuable for heavy labor. But their unpredictable temperament when threatened had earned them a reputation as monsters. Captain, spoke up Dr. James Wright, the ship's linguist and cultural specialist. His young face showed the kind of determination that Elena had learned to recognize in her crew. I've been reviewing the Galactic Accords on abandoned sentient beings. Technically, since the Zilithians have officially departed and renounced all claims to their property on the surface, the Vorthak is now considered a free entity under interstellar law. Elena nodded slowly, understanding the implication. Which means we have the legal right to offer assistance if we choose to do so. She paused, looking around at her crew. But I want everyone to understand the risks. Vorthaks are incredibly strong, and when they're in pain or frightened, they can be extremely dangerous. There's no guarantee that it would accept our help or that it wouldn't attack us if we try to approach. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Sarah Kim stepped forward, her expression resolute. Captain, I didn't join Starfleet to turn my back on suffering beings, regardless of their species. I've studied Vorthak physiology during my xenobiology training. With the right approach and medical supplies, we might be able to stabilize its condition. The sentiment was echoed around the bridge as other crew members voiced their agreement. Elena felt a surge of pride in her team. This was exactly why she loved working with humans. Their instinctive compassion often overrode their sense of self-preservation, sometimes to their detriment, but more often to the betterment of the galaxy. Very well, Elena decided. Dr. Martinez, I want a full analysis of the creature's species requirements, diet, environmental needs, medical considerations. Dr. Kim, Prepare a field medical kit with everything you think we might need for trauma treatment. Mr. Chun. Send a message to Starfleet Command informing them of our situation and our intention to render aid. As her crew sprang into action, Elena returned to observing the wounded Vorthak through her binoculars. The creature had managed to drag itself into the shade of an abandoned mining structure, but its movements were growing weaker by the hour. She wondered what thoughts passed through its alien mind. Whether it understood that it had been abandoned by the beings it had served faithfully for so many years. The Endeavor's sensors detected no other ships within 3 light years, and the nearest inhabited system with advanced medical facilities was over a week away at maximum warp. If they were going to help this creature, they would have to do it alone. Using only their own resources and ingenuity, Elena had faced many challenges during her 12 years as a starship captain, but she had never attempted to provide medical aid to a Vorthak. The academic part of her mind noted that this would likely be the first documented case of human Vorthak medical cooperation in galactic history. The emotional part of her mind simply saw a suffering being that needed help. "Captain," Dr. Wright called out from his station, "I've located some basic Vorthak linguistic patterns in our database. It's not much, but I might be able to establish rudimentary communication if we get close enough." Elena smiled grimly. "Good, we're going to need every advantage we can get." She activated the ship's general communication system to address her entire crew. "All hands, this is the captain. We have a wounded alien being on the planet's surface that requires immediate medical assistance. This is a voluntary mission with significant personal risk. Anyone who wishes to remain aboard the ship will not be judged for that decision." The response was immediate and unanimous. Every single crew member volunteered to participate in the rescue mission. Elena had to blink back tears as she realized that her faith in humanity had once again been validated. While other species might calculate risk versus reward, humans seemed hardwired to help those in need, regardless of the personal cost. The shuttlecraft Phoenix descended through Kepler-4 42b's thick atmosphere with a gentle vibration that barely registered on the inertial dampeners. Captain Rodriguez piloted the craft herself, with Dr. Martinez monitoring the wounded, Vorthak's vital signs from the passenger compartment, and Dr. Kim reviewing her medical protocols on a portable tablet. Lieutenant Chin maintained communications with the Endeavor while Dr. Wright practiced basic Vorthak greeting phrases under his breath as they approached the landing zone. Elena could see the creature more clearly through the shuttle's enhanced viewing port. The Vorthak had positioned itself in a defensive posture against the mining structure, its massive head turned toward their approaching craft. Despite its obvious pain, the creature's amber eyes tracked their movement with intelligent alertness. "Vital signs are stable but weak," Dr. Martinez reported. "Heart rate is elevated, consistent with stress and pain response. I'm detecting significant dehydration and what appears to be infection in at least 3 of the major wounds." Elena set the shuttle down approximately 50 meters from the Vorthak's position, close enough to render aid but far enough to avoid triggering an aggressive response. The creature's head lifted slightly at their landing, but it made no move toward or away from them. "Dr. Wright, can you establish any form of communication?" Elena asked as they began their pre-exit preparations. The young linguist activated his translation device and spoke slowly into the microphone. A series of low, harmonic tones emerged from the external speakers, accompanied by brief flashes of colored light. The Vorthak's ears, which had been pressed flat against its skull, suddenly perked forward with obvious interest. "I think I got its attention," Wright said with barely contained excitement. "I just told it that we're here to help and that we mean no harm." The response: "It's trying to communicate back, but its voice is too weak for my equipment to pick up clearly." Dr. Kim gathered her medical supplies while Elena checked her sidearm. She hoped she wouldn't need the weapon, but approaching an injured and potentially frightened alien predator required reasonable precautions. "Remember, everyone, slow movements, no sudden gestures. And if the creature shows any signs of aggression, we retreat immediately to the shuttle." The first step outside the Phoenix brought them into Kepler-4 42b's warm, humid environment. The air smelled of ozone and unfamiliar plant life, with an underlying metallic scent from the mining operations. The Vorthak watched their approach with growing alertness, its massive head following their every movement. Dr. Wright continued his attempts at communication, his voice steady despite the obvious nervousness he felt. "I'm telling it that we have medicine and water," he explained quietly to the others. Vorthaks understand basic concepts of healing and care, according to the linguistic databases. When they reached a distance of about 10 meters, the Vorthak made a sound that was part growl and part whimper. Dr. Wright's translation device rendered it as something like "why," followed by what might have been the Vorthak equivalent of confusion. "I think it's asking why we're here," Wright interpreted. "From what I understand of Vorthak social structure, they don't have a concept of cross-species altruism. In their experience, other species only interact with them when there's something to be gained." Elena gestured for the team to halt while she considered their next move. The creature was clearly intelligent enough to be suspicious of their motives, which was both encouraging and challenging. An intelligent being might be reasoned with, but it would also be more likely to question their intentions. Dr. Kim stepped forward slightly, her medical bag clearly visible in her hands. She spoke directly to the creature, her voice gentle and reassuring, while Dr. Wright translated her words into the harmonic tones of Vorthak language. "We see that you're hurt. We have medicine that can help reduce your pain and heal your wounds. We don't want anything from you except to help you feel better." The Vorthak's response was a long, complex series of sounds that caused Wright's translation device to struggle momentarily. When the interpretation finally appeared on his display, his eyes widened in surprise. "It's asking if we're going to take it away to work for us once it's healed. It seems to think that any kindness must come with a price." Dr. Martinez shook her head sadly. 20 years of servitude would certainly create that expectation. It probably doesn't understand the concept of help without obligation. Elena made a decision that would later be cited in xenological textbooks throughout human space. She removed her sidearm from its holster, set it carefully on the ground, and stepped away from it with her hands clearly visible. Then she sat down cross-legged in the dusty soil, making herself as non-threatening as possible. "Tell it that we're not here to take anything from it," she instructed Wright. "Tell it that once it's healed, it's free to go wherever it chooses. We just want to help because helping is what we do." The translation took several minutes, with Wright struggling to find Vorthak concepts that matched human motivations. Finally, the creature responded with what sounded like a question. "It's asking what word we use for this kind of behavior," Wright reported. "Helping without expecting anything in return?" "Apparently there's no direct translation in its language." Elena smiled, thinking of all the human philosophical and religious traditions that had wrestled with this same concept throughout history. "Tell it that we call it compassion. Or maybe just being human." As Wright worked to convey this concept, the Vorthak slowly began to lower its defensive posture. Its great head moved closer to the ground, and one of its massive, clawed hands extended slightly toward them in what Dr. Martinez recognized as a gesture of cautious trust. Dr. Kim took this as permission to approach, moving slowly with her medical scanner extended. "The wounds are deep but clean," she reported, "probably from sharp metal debris during whatever accident happened. No signs of toxin exposure or internal organ damage. This is definitely treatable." The creature allowed the human medical officer to examine its injuries, only flinching slightly when the scanner's beam passed over the deeper cuts. Its amber eyes never left Elena's face, as if trying to understand the motivations of these strange, soft aliens who claimed to help without seeking anything in return. As Dr. Kim began applying antiseptic to the wounds, the Vorthak made a sound that Wright's device translated as something between gratitude and confusion. It seemed to be asking why they would waste their resources on a creature that could give them nothing valuable. Elena looked up into those ancient, intelligent eyes and spoke directly to the creature, trusting Wright to translate her words accurately. "Because every life has value. Because suffering should be eased when it can be. because sometimes the right thing to do is also the human thing to do. 3 days had passed since the initial contact, and the abandoned mining facility had been transformed into an impromptu medical camp. The crew of the Endeavour had worked tirelessly to create a comfortable recovery environment for their massive patient, whom Dr. Wright had learned was called Vexgar in the creature's own language. The Vorthic's condition had improved dramatically under Dr. Kim's care. The infections were responding well to human antibiotics, surprisingly enough, and the wounds were beginning to heal at a rate that impressed even Dr. Martinez. More importantly, Vexgar had begun to trust his unlikely caregivers. Allowing them to approach freely and even seeming to enjoy their company, Elena sat beside the creature's massive form, reading from a human poetry collection while Vexgar listened with obvious fascination. Wright's translation device had improved significantly as it learned more of the Vorthic's personal dialect, and communication had become much more natural. The concept of creating sounds for beauty rather than communication is entirely foreign. To Vexgar, Wright explained during one of their regular briefings. Vorthix are pragmatic creatures. Everything they say serves a specific purpose: warning, instruction, mating calls, territory marking. The idea that humans create and share sounds simply because they find them pleasing has completely captivated him. Dr. Kim approached with her medical scanner, noting with satisfaction that Vexgar automatically shifted to give her better access to his healing wounds. The trust between species that had developed was remarkable, considering that just days ago the creature had been prepared to defend itself against what it assumed were potential captors. His physical recovery is ahead of schedule, Kim reported. The wounds are closing nicely and his strength is returning rapidly, but I'm more concerned about his psychological state. He keeps asking when we're going to tell him what we want him to do in exchange for our help. This had become a recurring issue in their interactions with Vexgar. The creature's worldview had been shaped by 2 decades of servitude, where every kindness came with an expectation of labor in return. The concept that humans might help, simply for the sake of helping, remained almost incomprehensible to him. Elena looked down at the massive creature, noting how his amber eyes followed her movements with intelligent curiosity rather than the wariness that had characterized their first encounter. Maybe we need to show him rather than tell him, she suggested. What if we demonstrate what freedom actually looks like? That afternoon, Elena announced her decision to the crew. They would begin teaching Vexgar about choices. Small ones at first, but genuine decisions that would be respected regardless of his selection. We'll start with food, Dr. Martinez suggested. Vorthix are omnivorous, and we've got a decent variety of supplies. Let him choose what he wants to eat instead of just providing what we think is best for his recovery. The experiment began simply enough. Dr. Kim presented Vexgar with 3 different meal options: a protein-rich synthetic meat substitute, a selection of fruits from the Endeavour's hydroponics bay, and a mixture of grain products that analysis suggested would be compatible with Vorthix digestion. The creature's response was initially confusion. Through Wright's translation, it became clear that Vexgar had never been offered choices regarding his meals during his entire time with the Zilithians. He had been fed whatever was most efficient and cost-effective, regardless of preference or taste. When he finally selected the fruits, his obvious enjoyment as he consumed them was heartbreaking to witness. I think this might be the first time in 20 years that he's eaten something purely because he wanted to, Elena observed quietly. The next day brought more complex choices. Where did Vexgar want to rest during his recovery? Near the mining equipment that was familiar to him, or in the shade of the natural rock formations that reminded him of his home world? Would he like to listen to human music, or would he prefer silence? Did he want company during his healing, or would he rather be alone? Each choice seemed to strengthen something within the creature that had been dormant for decades. His responses became more animated, his curiosity about his human caregivers more pronounced. He began asking questions about human society, particularly about how humans made decisions and whether they were ever forced to work against their will. Wright spent hours explaining human concepts of freedom, democracy, and individual rights. struggling to find Vorthak equivalents for ideas that had no parallel in the creature's experience. He's having trouble understanding why humans would create systems that limit their own power over others, Wright reported. From his perspective, if humans are capable of kindness, why wouldn't they simply trust their leaders to be kind rather than creating laws to prevent cruelty? Elena found herself drawn into philosophical discussions with an alien mind that was clearly more complex than galactic society had ever recognized. The X-Scar-esque questions about human nature often forced her to examine her own assumptions about morality, freedom, and the responsibilities that came with power. Your people choose to help me even though I cannot give you anything valuable, X-Scar communicated one evening as the twin suns set over Kepler 442b. Your people choose to give me choices even though it would be easier to simply tell me what to do. This is not efficient behavior. Why do humans do things that are not efficient? Elena considered the question carefully before responding. Because we've learned that efficiency isn't the most important thing. We've discovered that when people are free to make their own choices, even if those choices aren't always the most efficient ones, they become more creative, more productive, and more happy. A galaxy full of happy people who choose to cooperate is stronger than a galaxy full of slaves who are forced to obey. The creature was quiet for a long time after Wright finished translating this concept. Finally, he asked the question that Elena had been expecting and dreading. When I am healed, what choices will I have? Elena looked up at the massive creature. That had somehow become not just a patient, but a friend. You'll have the same choice that every human has, she said. You can go anywhere in the galaxy that will accept you. You can work or not work as you choose. You can travel with us for a while if you want to learn more about human society. Or you can return to your homeworld, or you can find somewhere entirely new to make a life for yourself. The silence that followed was profound. Elena realized that she had just offered a creature the one thing he had never possessed, complete freedom to determine his own destiny. The weight of that gift was evident in X-Scar's careful consideration of her words. And if I choose to stay with humans? If I choose to work for your people, Elena smiled. Then you'll be paid fairly for your labor, treated with respect, and free to leave whenever you decide you want to do something else. That's what we call employment rather than slavery. For the first time since their arrival, X-Scar made the sound that Wright's device identified as Vorthak laughter. It was a deep, rumbling noise that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest, and it filled Elena with more satisfaction than any successful diplomatic mission she had ever completed. The 6th day of X-Scar's recovery brought an unexpected complication. Lieutenant Chen's monitoring station aboard the Endeavour detected 3 ships approaching Kepler 442b at high speed. 2 Zilithian corporate vessels and 1 craft that registered as belonging to the Hegemony Enforcement Division, the galactic community's equivalent of interstellar police. Elena received the communication while she was helping X-Scar practice walking on his recently healed legs. The massive creature had regained most of his strength and was eager to test his mobility, though he still moved carefully to avoid reopening his wounds. Captain Rodriguez, came the stern voice of Commander Zilfak, the Zilithian expedition leader who had abandoned X-Scar less than a week earlier. We are returning to claim our property. Please prepare the Vorthak for immediate transfer to our vessels. Elena felt her jaw clench in anger, but she kept her voice professional. Commander, I was under the impression that you had renounced all claims to materials left behind on Kepler 442b. That would include X-Scar, who is now a free sentient being under interstellar law. The creature was temporarily abandoned due to medical emergency protocols, Zilfak replied smoothly. We have returned with proper medical facilities to continue its care. As its legal owners, we demand immediate return of our property. Dr. Wright, who had been listening to the exchange, quickly pulled up the relevant legal codes on his portable terminal. His face grew grim as he read through the complex regulations governing abandoned alien workers. Captain, this could be a problem. There's a clause about temporary medical abandonment that might give them legal standing if they can prove they intended to return. Elena looked down at Dexkar, who had understood enough of the conversation to realize what was happening. The creature's amber eyes showed the first fear she had seen since their initial encounter, and his massive body tensed as if preparing to flee or fight. "They will not take me back to the work cages," Dexkar communicated through Wright's device. "I have learned about choices. I have learned about freedom. I will not forget these things." Elena made a decision that would later be studied in both military academies and law schools throughout human space. "Commander Zilthek, Dexkar has formally requested asylum with the Sol Federation. As the ranking human officer in this system, I am granting that asylum pending review by proper authorities." The response was immediate and furious. "You have no legal standing to grant asylum to our property. The Hegemony Enforcement Division is with us precisely to prevent this kind of human interference." Elena activated her personal communicator to contact the Endeavor directly. "Mr. Chun, please prepare a full legal brief on interstellar asylum law and transmit it to the approaching vessels. Also, begin recording all communications for later review by Federation legal authorities." The Hegemony Enforcement Vessel, commanded by a cold-voiced official named Arbitrator Kexelon, joined the conversation. "Captain Rodriguez, the law regarding asylum for contracted workers is complex. However, if the being in question is truly requesting asylum of its own free will, rather than being coerced by human agents, then legal precedent supports a hearing before final determination." Elena felt a surge of hope. Dexkar is absolutely requesting asylum of his own free will. He has made this decision after being informed of all his options, including the possibility of returning to Zilithian employment. What followed was 3 hours of the most complex legal maneuvering Elena had ever experienced. The Zilithians argued that Dexkar was simply confused by human manipulation and lacked the cognitive capacity to make legal decisions about his own status. The hegemony official demanded proof that the creature understood the implications of asylum request and that he had not been coerced. Dr. Wright worked feverishly to prepare a comprehensive demonstration of Dexkar's intelligence and decision-making capacity. "We need to prove beyond any doubt that he's not just a trained animal following human commands," Wright explained to Elena during a brief break in the proceedings. Elena looked at Dexkar, who had been listening to the legal discussions with growing understanding and anger. "What do you want to say to them?" she asked the creature directly. "This is your choice to make, and will support whatever decision you reach." Dexkar considered her question for several minutes before responding in his own language, speaking directly into Wright's translation device. What emerged was a statement that would be quoted in legal textbooks for generations to come. "I am Dexkar of the Broken Chains clan, born under the 3 moons of Vorth Prime for 20 cycles of this star. I moved stones and dug holes for the Zilithians because I was told I had no choice. The humans came to me when I was dying and gave me medicine not because they needed my strength, but because they believed my life had value. They gave me food and asked what I preferred to eat. They asked where I wanted to rest. They asked what I wanted to hear. No one had ever asked me what I wanted before. The Zilithians say I am their property because I worked for them. The humans say I'm a person because I can choose. I choose to believe the humans. I choose to learn more about this thing called freedom. I choose to go with the humans not because they command it, but because I trust them to honor their promise that someday, if I wish it, I will be free to leave them as well. I am not confused. I am not coerced. I am awake for the first time in 20 years, and I will not go back to sleep." The silence that followed Dexkar's statement was profound. Even Commander Zilthek seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Arbitrator Kexelon was the first to respond. The statement demonstrates clear cognitive function and understanding of legal concepts. However, the question of Zilithian property rights remains unresolved. "I propose a compromise. The creature will be placed in temporary custody of the human vessel, while formal asylum proceedings are conducted through proper channels. If asylum is granted, any compensation owed to the Zilithians for loss of property will be determined by hegemony courts." Elena nodded acceptance of these terms. though she made a mental note to contact Federation Legal Services about covering any potential compensation costs. The important thing was that Dexkar would not be forcibly returned to servitude, while his case was being decided. As the legal discussion concluded and the various ships departed, Elena sat down beside Dexkar to watch the sunset over Kepler 442b's alien landscape. The creature seemed thoughtful, processing everything that had happened. "I have learned something today," Dexkar communicated quietly. "I have learned that freedom is not just about making choices for yourself. Sometimes freedom requires other people to defend your right to make those choices." Elena smiled, realizing that in trying to teach an alien about human values, they had all learned something important about the courage required to live by those values when they were challenged. 6 months had passed since the legal proceedings at Kepler 442b concluded in Dexkar's favor. The hegemony courts had ruled that any sentient being who could articulate a clear preference for asylum had the right to that protection, regardless of previous contractual obligations. The Zilithians had been compensated for their lost investment, though the court had reduced the amount significantly after evidence emerged of their neglectful treatment of Vorthak. Workers, Dexkar now lived aboard the Endeavour as the ship's first official non-human crew member. His integration into human society had been remarkable, aided by his natural intelligence and genuine curiosity about human customs and values. He had chosen to take formal classes in human languages, philosophy, and law, becoming fluent enough in Standard Galactic that he no longer needed Wright's translation device for basic communication. The creature had also chosen to work, accepting a position as the ship's cultural liaison and heavy equipment specialist. His strength made him invaluable for tasks that would normally require mechanical assistance, but more importantly, his unique perspective as a former slave had proven invaluable in the Endeavour's diplomatic missions. Elena stood on the bridge watching Dexkar interact with a delegation of Cytherian officials, another species known for their use of forced labor. The massive Vorthak spoke with quiet authority about workers' rights and the practical benefits of treating employees as valued partners rather than expendable resources. His words carried weight that no human diplomat could match, coming as they did from someone who had experienced both systems personally. "Captain," Dr. Wright approached with his usual tablet in hand, but his expression was unusually excited. "We've received a priority communication from the Vorthak Homeworld Authority. They want to meet with Dexkar." Elena raised an eyebrow. The Vorthak Homeworld has been isolationist for over 50 years. They barely acknowledge that their people work off-world, let alone maintain diplomatic contact with them. "That's what makes this so significant," Wright continued. "Apparently word of Dexkar's asylum case has spread throughout Vorthak space. The story of a Vorthak who chose freedom over security, who found aliens willing to defend his right to make that choice, has become something of a legend among his people." Elena looked out at Dexkar, who was now demonstrating proper safety protocols to the Cytherian delegation, while explaining why worker protection actually increased productivity. The creature had grown more confident over the months, standing taller and speaking with an authority that commanded respect rather than demanding it. "What exactly does the Homeworld Authority want?" Elena asked. Wright consulted his tablet. "They want Dexkar to return to Vorth Prime as an ambassador. They're considering establishing formal diplomatic relations with species that recognize Vorthak rights, starting with humanity. They want someone who understands both cultures to help negotiate the terms." The implications were staggering. If the Vorthas established formal diplomatic relations based on recognition of their people's rights, it could fundamentally change how they were treated throughout the galaxy. Other species who relied on Vorthak labor would be forced to negotiate with a recognized government, rather than dealing with individual refugees or slaves. Elena made her way across the bridge to where Dexkar was concluding his demonstration. She waited respectfully until he had finished answering the Cytherian's questions before requesting a private conversation. "You seem concerned?" "Elena," Dexkar observed, using the informal address he had learned to employ with friends. His mastery of human body language had become quite sophisticated. Has something troubling happened? Elena explained the communication from his homeworld, watching carefully for his reaction. Vexkar listened without interruption, his amber eyes growing thoughtful as she described the potential appointment as ambassador. They wish me to return home, he said quietly, to speak for my people in negotiations with other species. It would be an incredible opportunity, Elena said carefully. You would have the chance to improve conditions for Vortha Kappa S throughout the galaxy. But the choice is entirely yours. You've made a life here among humans, and you're valued here. No one would think less of you for choosing to stay. Vexkar was silent for several minutes, considering the weight of the decision. Finally, he asked the question Elena had expected. If I choose to take this position, would I still be welcome among humans? Could I return to the Endeavor if my mission to help my people is completed? Elena smiled, understanding the deeper question behind his words. Vexkar, you're not just crew anymore. You're family. There will always be a place for you among us, regardless of what paths you choose to explore. The creature made the rumbling sound that Elena had learned was Vorthic expression of deep emotional satisfaction. Then I believe I must accept this responsibility. My people deserve the same choices that humans gave to me. They deserve to know that there are species in the galaxy who will treat them with respect and fairness. Over the following week, Elena watched Vexkar prepare for his new role with characteristic thoroughness. He studied diplomatic protocols, practiced formal Vorthic speech patterns he hadn't used since childhood, and most importantly, worked with Dr. Wright to develop a comprehensive briefing on human society and values. He wants to use humanity as an example of how species can evolve beyond exploiting others, Wright explained to Elena during one of their planning sessions. Not because we're perfect, but because we've demonstrated the willingness to change when presented with evidence that our actions cause suffering. Elena reflected on that observation as she watched Vexkar pack his few possessions. The creature had never accumulated much in the way of material goods, but he carefully stored the poetry books Elena had given him and the philosophical texts he had studied during his integration into human society the night before his departure. Vexkar requested a private dinner with Elena and the senior staff who had been involved in his rescue and recovery. As they gathered in the ship's main dining hall, the creature stood to address them with formal ceremony. 6 months ago, I was dying alone on an alien world, abandoned by those I had served faithfully for 20 years. I expected to die as I had lived, as property valued only for the work I could perform. Instead, I was found by humans, who chose to see me as something more valuable than my labor. You taught me that kindness does not require payment. You taught me that choice is more powerful than force. You taught me that freedom is not something that can be given or taken away by others, but something that exists when people are willing to defend each other's right to choose their own path. Now I go to teach these lessons to my own people, and through them to the galaxy. But I will never forget that everything I have learned about dignity and worth, I learned from humans who chose to help a dying alien simply because it was the right thing to do. Elena stood to respond, but found herself momentarily overcome with emotion. Looking around the table at her crew, she saw the same pride and satisfaction reflected in their faces. They had done something truly significant. Not through grand gestures or advanced technology, but through the simple act of treating another being with compassion and respect. Vexkar, she said finally, you came to us as someone who needed help. You're leaving as someone who will help others. That transformation isn't something we did for you. It's something you did for yourself once you were given the opportunity. We're proud to have been part of that journey, and we're excited to see what you'll accomplish next. As Vexkar departed the next morning aboard a Vorthic diplomatic vessel, Elena stood at the observation deck watching until his ship disappeared into hyperspace. Dr. Martinez joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a satisfied expression. Do you think he'll succeed? Martinez asked. Changing an entire species' relationship with the rest of the galaxy is an enormous undertaking. Elena smiled, thinking about everything she had learned from Vexkar during his time with them. If anyone can do it, he can. He understands both sides now. He knows what it's like to be treated as property, and he knows what it's like to be treated as a person. That's exactly the kind of perspective his people need. 2 years later, Elena stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Cooperation Council, watching as Thexgar addressed representatives from over 40 species. The massive Vorthak wore ceremonial robes of his homeworld, but his words carried the confidence and wisdom he had gained during his time among humans. Honored delegates, Thexgar spoke in perfect Standard Galactic, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. I stand before you today not as property seeking better treatment, but as the official representative of the Vorthak Democratic Assembly, a government that exists because we learned that our people are worth more than their labor. Elena smiled with pride as she watched from the human delegation section. The changes that had swept through Vorthak society over the past 2 years had been remarkable. Inspired by Thexgar's story and the example of human compassion, the traditionally hierarchical Vorthak culture had undergone a peaceful revolution, establishing their first democratic government and demanding recognition as equals in galactic society. The assembly hall buzzed with conversation as delegates from various species discussed the implications of this development. Many civilizations had built their economies on Vorthak labor, assuming that the creatures were too primitive to organize themselves politically. The emergence of a unified Vorthak government had forced a complete reevaluation of interstellar labor practices. The humans who rescued me taught me that true strength comes not from the power to force others to serve you, but from the wisdom to inspire others to choose cooperation, Thexgar continued. Today I propose the Universal Workers' Rights Accords, a treaty that would establish minimum standards for the treatment of all sentient beings engaged in interstellar labor. Elena watched as several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Zilithians, in particular, looked distinctly unhappy with this turn of events. Their representative, Commander Zilthak, had opposed the recognition of Vorthak independence from the beginning, arguing that it set a dangerous precedent for other laborer species. Dr. Wright, now serving as Elena's cultural advisor, leaned over to whisper, "The Catherians are signaling support, along with the Altarian Federation and the Centauri Alliance. If we can get the major powers on board, this could actually pass." The debate that followed was intense but respectful. Thexgar had spent months building coalition support, traveling throughout the galaxy to meet with leaders and demonstrate that Vorthak independence would benefit everyone involved. His arguments were practical rather than purely moral. Free workers were more productive, more innovative, and more loyal than slaves. Elena was particularly impressed by how Thexgar handled questions from skeptical delegates. When the Regelian trade minister argued that economic disruption would harm smaller civilizations, Thexgar responded with detailed economic models showing how voluntary labor markets actually increased overall galactic prosperity. Ambassador Thexgar called out, "Delegate Fexrin from the Andromedan Consortium, your proposals sound idealistic, but how can you guarantee that implementing these standards won't simply drive labor costs beyond what many civilizations can afford?" Thexgar's response demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of economics and politics he had developed since leaving the Endeavor. Honorable delegate, the question assumes that the current system is actually efficient. However, economic analysis shows that societies with voluntary labor markets consistently outperform those relying on forced labor in terms of innovation, productivity, and overall economic growth. The initial transition costs are quickly offset by increased efficiency and voluntary cooperation. Elena felt a surge of pride as she watched her former crew member field complex questions with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. The creature who had once been abandoned as broken property now stood as an equal among the galaxy's most powerful leaders, arguing for principles that would benefit billions of beings. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Elena had hoped but decisive enough to matter. The Universal Workers' Rights Accords passed by a margin of 63%. with most abstentions coming from species that needed time to restructure their labor practices rather than fundamental opposition to the principles involved. After the session concluded, Elena made her way through the celebrating crowd to reach Thekskar. The massive Vorthok was surrounded by well-wishers and media representatives, but his amber eyes immediately found her in the crowd. "Elena," he said, his voice warm with affection. "You came." "I wouldn't have missed this for anything," Elena replied, grasping one of his massive clawed hands in both of hers. "You've accomplished something incredible here." Thexkar's expression grew thoughtful. "We have accomplished something incredible. None of this would have been possible without humans who chose to see value in a dying alien when no one else cared." Elena shook her head. "You did this yourself, Thekskar. We just gave you the chance to heal and make your own choices. Everything that followed came from your own courage and wisdom." "Perhaps," Thekskar conceded. "But I learned about courage and wisdom from humans who demonstrated both when they had nothing to gain from helping me. That lesson has guided everything I have done since." As they spoke, Elena noticed a familiar figure approaching through the crowd, Dr. Kim, now serving as the Federation's Director of Xenological Medicine, along with Dr. Wright and several other former crew members of the Endeavor. The reunion was emotional, with everyone eager to catch up on Thexkar's diplomatic successes and their own career developments. "So what's next?" Dr. Kim asked as the group found a quieter corner of the assembly hall. "You've revolutionized galactic labor practices and established your people as a major political force. That's got to be exhausting." Thekskar made the rumbling sound that they all recognized as Vorthok laughter. "Actually, I've been thinking about taking some time to write. I want to document this entire experience from my abandonment on Kepler 442b to today's vote. I think the galaxy needs to understand how much can change when people choose compassion over convenience." Elena smiled, remembering the creature who had been fascinated by human poetry during his recovery. "What will you call it?" Thekskar considered the question seriously. "I think I will call it The Day I Learned to Choose. It will be about the moment when a dying slave realized that he could become something more, because aliens he had never met decided that his life had value." Dr. Wright pulled out his ever-present tablet and began making notes. "I'd love to help with the translation work, making sure the human perspective is accurately represented alongside the Vorthok viewpoint. And I'll want to contribute medical data about interspecies care," Dr. Kim added. "Other people need to understand that helping isn't just about good intentions. It requires practical knowledge and genuine commitment." Elena looked around at her former crew members, now scattered across various important positions throughout Federation space, all of them still connected by the experience they had shared 2 years earlier. They had saved one life, but that action had rippled outward to affect billions of beings throughout the galaxy. "You know what I think?" Elena said finally. "I think this is what humans do best. We're not the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced technologically, but we seem to be particularly good at recognizing that other beings deserve the same consideration we want for ourselves." Thekskar nodded gravely. That recognition, that simple acknowledgement of shared worth across species lines, has changed the course of galactic history. And it all began with humans who chose to help because helping was the right thing to do. As the celebration continued around them, Elena reflected on the unexpected consequences of that simple decision to render aid to a suffering creature. They had set out to save one life, but in doing so, they had planted seeds of change that were still growing throughout the galaxy. It was, she thought, a perfect example of why humanity's greatest strength might not be their technology or their military might, but their stubborn insistence on treating others with dignity and respect. Even when it would be easier not to, the abandoned alien beast had become an ambassador, a revolutionary and a bridge between worlds. But more importantly, he had become living proof that every life held the potential for greatness, if only someone was willing to give it the chance to flourish.